The Puppet That Pulled the Strings. Chapter 1. Strings Attached. The shop had always been there, tucked between a shuttered bakery and an empty bookstore, its sign faded to the point of invisibility. Most people passed it without even noticing. But when Jonah stepped in, something called to him, like the tug of a string fastened to his spine. Inside, the scent of old wood and varnish was thick. Rows of shelves bowed beneath the weight of hand-carved marionettes, each with painted faces frozen in twisted smiles. Some looked centuries old, others disturbingly fresh. An old man sat at the back, behind a cracked glass counter, hunched over a small figure he was restringing. He didn't look up. "They choose you," he muttered. Jonah blinked. "Excuse me?" The man's hands never stopped moving. The puppets. They know who belongs to them. Jonah turned to a puppet resting on a high shelf. It was different, darker. Its body was smaller, painted in deep crimson and black, and its eyes weren't painted at all. They were glass. The moment Jonah locked eyes with it, something shifted, a faint creaking sound, wood moving, but none of the strings moved. "Can I see that one?" he asked. The old man froze. Slowly, he turned toward Jonah, eyes narrowing. "That one hasn't been touched in years." But it looked at me. A pause. Then the old man nodded once and stood. He brought the puppet down, gently placing it in Jonah's hands. The strings felt warm. The moment Jonah touched it, the shop dimmed. The lights flickered. The carved mouths of the other puppets stretched wider. And the puppet moved. Just a twitch, a curl of the finger, but it was enough. "Careful," the old man whispered. "Once it's attached, it doesn't let go." Chapter 2. The Wooden Smile. Jonah left the shop that evening with the puppet wrapped carefully in brown paper and twine, its weight oddly comforting in his arms. The old man hadn't charged him. "It's yours now," he'd said. "It chose you." The words lingered in Jonah's mind as he made his way home. That night, he placed the puppet on his desk, still wrapped, and went to bed with a sense of unease pressing against his chest. At 3:07 a.m., he woke with a start. Something was watching him. He sat up. The room was still, the streetlight casting faint gold through the blinds. The bundle on his desk had shifted. It now sat upright, unwrapped. The puppet faced him. Its glass eyes glinted, catching the light in a way that suggested more than just reflection. Its painted smile, thin, sharp, almost smug, seemed deeper now, like it knew something he didn't. Jonah stood, slowly approaching it. "Did you move?" he whispered, feeling ridiculous. The puppet didn't answer. Of course not. It was wooden string. Still, he reached out and turned it slightly so it faced away. Then, he returned to bed. In the morning, it was facing him again. He told himself it must have rotated slightly. Maybe a draft. Maybe he hadn't set it properly. But every day after, it changed. The smile grew more defined. The joints loosened. Its head tilted, slightly more curious. And the worst part, its hands. They had started curling inward, as if gripping something. Jonah took photos, compared them, The changes were real. On the 7th day, he found a note beneath the puppet. The paper was thin and yellowed, written in spidery ink. "Thank you for freeing me." That night, it smiled wider. Chapter 3: Behind the Curtain. Jonah started hearing it at night. Faint footsteps, the creak of old wood, and the rhythmic tapping of something hollow moving across the floor. It always stopped when he turned on the lights, always just out of reach. But it was happening more often. He began locking the puppet inside his closet at night, not out of fear, at least that's what he told himself, but out of caution. Still, every morning the closet door would be ajar, and the puppet would be seated neatly on his desk again, arms in a new position, glass eyes staring at him with cold amusement. One afternoon, Jonah skipped work. He had to know. He needed to see if it would move. He set up a camera, pointed it at the puppet, left it running while he sat in the next room with headphones in, pretending to ignore it. When he reviewed the footage, his stomach dropped. The puppet didn't just move, it danced. Its limbs twitched, stretched, curled. It stood upright on its own, bending forward in a grotesque bow before walking toward the lens and blocking it entirely with its face. The last 10 minutes were just its unmoving glass eyes filling the screen. Jonah deleted the footage immediately. That night, he placed the puppet in a cardboard box, taped it shut, and shoved it under his bed. But around midnight, he heard something, a rustling, then tearing, then wooden feet hitting the floor. He turned on the lamp. The box was torn open. The puppet was gone. Jonah stood, heart pounding, searching the room. That's when he saw it. The edge of a red velvet curtain draped across his wall that hadn't been there before. His bedroom wall had no curtain, no rod, no reason for one to exist. He reached out and pulled it aside. Behind the curtain was a small stage, and the puppet was waiting. Chapter 4: The Hand That Moved on Its Own. Jonah stared at the stage behind the curtain for a long time, waiting for it to vanish like a trick of the mind. But it didn't. The small wooden platform remained, complete with miniature footlights and worn red drapes. The puppet stood at the center, arms relaxed at its sides, head slightly tilted, as if expecting applause. He stepped closer. The stage creaked beneath his weight, not enough to hold a person, and yet it didn't collapse. The air around it was colder, and the shadows seemed to cling to his legs. The puppet raised one hand. Jonah froze. He hadn't touched it. No strings moved. But the hand lifted slowly, unnaturally smooth, fingers outstretched as if reaching for him. Then it stopped. Jonah reached out to touch it, trembling. As soon as their fingers met, a shock shot up his arm. Not pain exactly, but a feeling of deep displacement, like something had entered him. His skin prickled. A low humming sound started in the back of his skull and didn't stop. He yanked his hand back. The puppet collapsed to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. But the sensation lingered. His right hand, it wouldn't stop twitching. That night, he wrapped the puppet in a heavy blanket and stuffed it inside a suitcase, locking it tight. He placed the suitcase in the hallway closet and slammed the door. Then he looked at his hand. It was still moving, fingers flexing, joints twitching, and once, only once, it moved in a motion he didn't recognize. A wave, as if something inside him was greeting someone else. In the mirror, for a brief second, his reflection smiled, but he didn't. The next morning, Jonah awoke with a sharp pain running through his shoulder and down to his hand. It felt like tendons were being plucked like strings. When he rolled out of bed, his right arm moved a half-second too late, like it was catching up. He tried to work, to type, to write, to do anything that involved fine control of his fingers. But they wouldn't obey him. He stared at his trembling hand, then taped it to a wooden board, trying to force stillness. But every so often, the board would thump against the table on its own. In desperation, he returned to the bookcase. It was empty. The puppet was gone. Where the suitcase had rested, a set of tiny footprints led away. Perfect impressions, each about 3 inches long, embedded into the carpet. He followed them. They led to the mirror, and when he looked inside, he saw himself. But this time, his reflection waved first. Chapter 5. Whispers from the Workbench. Jonah didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the puppet's hand, his own hand, waving in that eerie, unfamiliar way. When he finally rose from bed, the stage was still behind the curtain, but the puppet was gone. In the silence of early morning, he heard it again, whispering, faint, just below the floorboards. He followed the sound to the attic, a place he hadn't visited in years. Dust coated everything in thick, gray layers. But in the far corner, covered by an old tarp, sat a wooden workbench. He didn't remember ever being there. The whispers grew louder the closer he got. Not voices exactly, more like murmurs of language that didn't belong to the living. As he pulled back the tarp, the whispers stopped. On the bench sat a carving knife, and a fresh block of wood, and a half-carved puppet head. Jonah blinked. It looked like him. He stepped back, heart racing. The grain of the wood ran like veins, and its eyes, empty sockets for now, seemed to follow him. Beside it, a journal lay open, pages filled with drawings of puppets, rituals, strings shaped like veins, and notes written in looping, spidery script. The bond begins at touch. The soul may transfer. The host will fade. He turned to the last page. There was a list of names, all crossed out, except the last one, Jonah, not crossed out. Below it, a simple phrase, ready for shaping. Jonah slowly backed away from the workbench, but his foot struck something solid. He turned around. Another block of wood, identical to the first. Then another. They lined the attic floor now, dozens of them, all positioned as if waiting to be used. And on the wall above the bench, someone had begun sketching figures in charcoal. Human silhouettes with puppeteer strings stretching from their fingers. Some were drawn upside down, others. His head began to ache. The whispers returned, but now they were coming from the journal itself. He opened it again. This time the pages were different. They detailed steps, instructions to transfer, bind, mirror, split. Each word burned behind his eyes. He saw flashes, his hands carving without instruction, wooden limbs twitching into life, a face in the mirror, smiling wider than his own, and always the stage, always the curtain. Jonah slammed the journal shut, but as he did, the attic light flickered violently. From below, downstairs, he heard the suitcase, a loud click, then the slow metallic rasp of the zipper sliding open. Then a thud, followed by small, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor. Getting closer, closer. Jonah reached for the carving knife. He wasn't sure if it was to protect himself or to begin carving. Chapter 6. The Face in the Firelight. Jonah didn't go to work. He didn't answer his phone. The puppet was somewhere in the house again. He could feel it. The workbench in the attic had changed. Every time he returned to it, the carving was further along. The puppet head looked more like him with each visit. The jawline, the mouth, even the faint scar above his left eyebrow. It was all there, but he hadn't touched it. He started hearing noises at night that weren't creaks or pipes. They were words, faint, distant, like breath moving through wooden slats. Sometimes they whispered his name, sometimes they just laughed. That night, the power went out. The house groaned in the dark. Jonah sat alone in the living room, a flashlight clenched in his hand, but the beam flickered wildly. Eventually, it died. With nothing else to do, he lit the fireplace. The warmth was fleeting. The fire cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. Jonah leaned in, trying to calm his thoughts, until he saw it. A face, just beyond the firelight, at the edge of the room. It was the puppet, not the carved one, not the one from the attic. This one moved. Its limbs flexed as if drawn by invisible strings, and its face, it was his. Jonah's mouth went dry. He stepped back, tripping over the rug, landing hard. The puppet stepped closer. The flames flared higher as if reacting to its presence. Its smile was gentle, but wrong, off. Painted lips curled upward, revealing perfect teeth carved into wood. "Why?" Jonah whispered. It lifted one hand and touched its cheek. "You gave me shape," it said. The voice wasn't quite his, but it was close enough to freeze him. "You were the vessel," it added, "but I've always been the maker." Jonah backed away, heart pounding. "I never asked for this, but you touched the strings." The puppet raised both arms. Strings appeared from nowhere, anchoring into the ceiling, and Jonah's limbs began to rise, slowly, painfully, as if someone else had taken hold. He fought back, screamed, but the strings only tightened. The fire roared. The mirror over the fireplace cracked, and the curtain behind him swayed gently, as if welcoming him back to the stage. But it didn't end there. The puppet turned and pointed to the cracked mirror. Jonah turned too and saw something worse than the puppet. He saw himself, but wooden, fully formed. His puppet twin stood inside the mirror, smiling wider than anything human should. Its fingers flexed in rhythm with his own. He blinked, and it was gone. Jonah fell to his knees, gasping. The strings retracted slowly. The fire dulled. And on the mantel, written in the ash, "You are ready?" The next morning, he found sawdust in his bed sheets. His skin itched like splinters had grown from within, and his eyes in the mirror glinted unnaturally, like polished varnish under flame. Chapter 7. The show must go on. Jonah didn't remember walking to the stage. He only knew that when he blinked, he was standing at its center, arms raised, palms facing out, legs stiff like a mannequin. The fire had gone cold behind him. The room was darker than it had ever been, lit only by footlights that cast an unnatural glow from beneath the curtain. The puppet sat in the front row, watching. Others joined it. Figures Jonah could fully see, shapes in the shadows, swaying gently like they were on strings of their own. Their heads bobbed, their limbs twitched. Some clapped, others laughed, but no sound came from their mouths. The curtain rose. A spotlight hit Jonah full in the face. His vision blurred, his ears rang. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't listen. Then came the strings. They descended from above, invisible but unmistakable. He felt them tug his arms, his jaw, even his eyelids. He was being puppeteered, but not from the outside. From within, his hands moved on their own, mimicking gestures he didn't recognize. He bowed, he danced, he waved, all while the audience swayed in their seats, their faces painted like his puppets, wide grins, hollow eyes. At the edge of the stage, the original puppet tilted its head and whispered, "We must finish the story." Jonah opened his mouth to speak, but another voice came out. His body froze in place, arms suspended midair, head tilted just like the puppets. The spotlight dimmed. The audience vanished, and Jonah stood there alone, locked in a pose he couldn't break, as if waiting for someone to pull the curtain closed. But the curtain didn't close. Instead, the floor beneath his feet began to shift. Soft music rose again. An eerie lullaby played on strings that sounded like they were being plucked from bone. Jonah turned slowly, his body responding not to will but to script. A table appeared center stage, lit from above, and on it lay a marionette that looked just like him, unfinished, with open seams and hollow limbs. He walked toward it. He picked up a brush. His fingers dipped into a pot of deep red paint that hadn't been there before, and he began to paint the puppet's smile. The audience returned, silently, all of them standing this time. Their wooden faces didn't change, but Jonah could feel their approval like pressure on his skin. The puppet in the front row lifted its hand again. The strings above Jonah shimmered, and the curtain behind him caught fire, slow, consuming flame that didn't burn hot, but cold like unraveling memory. As the flames spread, Jonah turned to face the audience. He lifted his arms again, this time willingly, and the puppet in the front row whispered, "Now take your bow." Jonah bowed. The clack of wooden applause echoed through the darkness, and the curtain finally fell. Chapter 8. The Forgotten Maker. The next morning, Jonah woke on the stage floor, limbs stiff, mouth dry. The curtains had closed and the seats were empty. The puppet was nowhere to be seen, but something had changed. He could feel it. The string inside him tugged. He stumbled back to his room, desperate to shake off the remnants of the night before. His body ached in places that weren't his muscles. It was deeper, like his joints were being rewired. That's when he found the note, tucked beneath his pillow. He remembers now. He didn't know what it meant until he returned to the attic. The workbench had changed again. This time, the half-carved puppet was gone. In its place was an old photograph, a black-and-white image, yellowed with age. A young boy standing beside a man at a wooden table. The boy held a carving knife. The man, Jonah recognized him, the shopkeeper. But the boy, it was Jonah, younger, much younger than he could remember, but it was him. He turned the photo over, scrawled in shaky ink, "You carved me first." Jonah's hands began to tremble. Memories stirred, half-formed flashes. A small puppet stage, a voice calling from behind a red curtain, splinters in his fingers, and a smile that didn't belong to him. He had been here before, long before the shop, long before the puppet. In the deepest corners of his mind, something opened. Something that had been sealed with time, buried under 1,000 normal days. The puppet hadn't chosen him. It had come back to him, because he was the original maker, and he had forgotten. Chapter 9. Threaded in silence. Jonah no longer heard the puppet's footsteps at night, because they were now his own. The creak of floorboards, the slight drag of a foot across the hallway. Familiar sounds that once haunted him now felt embedded in his every movement. The strings were no longer invisible. When he stood before the mirror, especially in dim light, he could see them. Thin, silvery threads stretching from his wrists and ankles upward into nothing. They shimmered like cobwebs. And they moved, even when he didn't. He tried to cut one with scissors. The blades passed right through, as if slicing mist. But the pain was real. It ran up his spine and behind his eyes. His vision blurred for hours afterward. The puppet no longer appeared physically. Instead, its presence lingered, whispers in the back of his mind, a pressure in his chest, a constant need to perform. He found himself bowing randomly in the middle of his apartment, laughing at nothing, mimicking the gestures he'd seen it perform. He avoided the attic, but something kept drawing him back. When he finally returned, the workbench was gone. In its place stood a mirror, full-length, old and ornate, with carvings of marionettes etched into its frame. He stood before it. In the reflection, Jonah saw himself. But behind him stood the puppet. Its hands rested gently on his shoulders, and though his mouth didn't move, the reflection whispered, "You're almost ready." Then the strings tightened, and Jonah smiled, even though he didn't want to. Chapter 10. Eyes of painted glass. The eyes were everywhere. Jonah first noticed them in the hallway mirror. At first glance, it was his reflection, but when he leaned closer, he saw that his irises had changed. They shimmered unnaturally, like glass marbles set too deep. He blinked hard, rubbed them, but the illusion remained. Later, he found them carved into the wooden walls of the attic. Dozens of tiny puppet eyes, each hand-painted with exquisite detail. All of them stared back. None of them blinked. Even his own photographs had changed. In every frame, his eyes had been painted over, wide, round, and wrong, not with ink or marker, with something thicker, acrylic maybe, as if the photos had been retouched while he slept. The puppet was nowhere to be seen, but its gaze was omnipresent. He tried to throw away the mirror. It came back. He smashed the photos. New ones appeared, posed identically in the same places, all with those painted glass eyes. In desperation, he visited the shop again, but the door wouldn't open. It was boarded up, dusty, as if it hadn't existed for years. Panicking, Jonah returned home. The lights flickered violently. His reflection grinned before he did. Then it whispered, "You gave me your sight. Now you see as I do." Jonah fell to the floor, clutching his head as visions flooded in. Memories not his own, puppets screaming as they were carved, strings tightening around necks, shows performed for audiences that didn't breathe. When he looked up, his reflection was gone, and the puppet was there instead, standing behind the glass, smiling through his eyes. Chapter 11. The Master Behind the Mask. Jonah woke in the middle of the night with the distinct feeling of being watched. Again. But this time, it wasn't the puppet. Not entirely. A new presence filled the room. He rose from bed and found the mirror at the foot of his bed. It hadn't been there before. Neither had the figure inside it. It was tall, taller than the puppet, taller than any human, draped in a velvet coat of deep, unnatural red. A porcelain mask covered its face, smooth and blank, save for a smile carved so wide it touched where ears should have been. Jonah staggered back. The figure didn't move in the glass, but behind him, in the room, it stepped forward. One sound followed it, the soft whisper of strings dragging across wood. "Who are you?" Jonah asked. The mask tilted, not in confusion, but amusement. "You were never meant to ask that," the voice said. It was Jonah's voice, but not just his. It was layered, echoed. 100 voices stacked into one. "You carved the first puppet to hide me," it said. "But every act needs its lead. You forgot your role." Jonah's knees buckled. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "But you made this." The figure stepped into the moonlight now. The strings it wore weren't strings, they were veins, black and pulsing, wrapped around its limbs like living rope. It reached up and removed the mask. Jonah's own face stared back at him, but older, hollow-eyed, empty. "You ran from the stage," it said. "Now the curtains are closing." And in the mirror, the audience clapped in silence. The show, it seemed, was nearly over. Chapter 12. Knots in the Mind. Jonah stopped leaving the house. Time lost meaning. Mornings bled into night. Meals went untouched. Clocks ticked irregularly. He tried to write things down, to track the days, but the ink smeared, the pages curled. Sometimes, when he looked back, The handwriting wasn't his. He kept hearing the sound of strings tightening, not just around his body, but inside his head, like thoughts were being pulled and knotted, tangled by hands that weren't his. The mirror followed him now. No matter where he went, it appeared. Hallway, kitchen, even the bathroom. Always upright, always clean, always watching. He tried to cover it. Blankets slid off, curtains unraveled, every reflection showed a different version of himself. One smiling, one crying, one bleeding from the mouth. And then he began forgetting. His mother's name, his address, how to unlock his own phone. He stared at photos and couldn't place the faces. The only constant was the puppet. It appeared not just in reflections now, but in memories. School plays, birthday parties, family dinners. He saw it in the background, sitting, smiling. He screamed at the mirror once, slamming it with a hammer. It cracked, but behind the shattered glass was not his room. It was the stage, lit and waiting, and the figure behind the curtain whispered. The tighter the knot, the clearer the roll. That night, Jonah dreamt he was hollow, wooden, hinged at the joints. And when he woke up, there were splinters in his bed. Chapter 13. Where Puppets Sleep. Jonah wandered the house with hollow eyes. He no longer questioned the shifting walls or the creaking footsteps that echoed without source. He no longer feared the puppet's return. It was already inside him. But he didn't know where it rested. Every room carried a strange stillness, like breath held too long. He felt drawn to the basement, a place he had never dared to go since moving in. The door had always stuck, but now it opened without resistance. The air was cold. The steps moaned under his weight. The light switch didn't work. He descended by the glow of his phone, casting weak beams on brick walls lined with something strange. Fabric, velvet, deep red like the stage curtains. He followed the narrow hallway to a chamber. Inside, rows of bunk-like niches were carved into the walls. In each one lay a puppet. Dozens of them. Some curled like children, others stiff in formal poses, all silent, all lifelike. Jonah stepped closer. The puppets weren't strangers. They were familiar. He recognized them. Friends, family, faces from dreams. Even the shopkeeper. Each had a tag beneath it, handwritten in the same spidery script. Performer, retired. He stumbled backward and tripped over something, another puppet. This one wasn't in a niche. It was on the floor, unfinished. Its hands still unpainted. Its head blank. Next to it sat a small sign, next in line. Jonah turned to run, but froze. At the far end of the chamber was a mirror. In it, he saw himself lying in one of the empty beds, smiling, eyes closed, sleeping. And slowly the real Jonah felt tired, too tired to climb the stairs. The velvet hung like a lullaby, and the puppets around him began to breathe. Chapter 14. The Final Performance. Jonah didn't remember standing up. One moment he was watching the mirror from across the room. The next, he was dressed in a suit he didn't own, black and gold, tailored perfectly, old-fashioned in design. The red curtain had returned behind him. This time, it covered every wall. The stage lights clicked on. The floor beneath his feet was polished wood, the same stage, the same footlights. The audience was full, but not alive. Each row was filled with puppets, seated upright, their wooden heads facing forward. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all with familiar faces. His boss, his neighbors, people he passed on the street, his mother. All painted, all lifeless, all watching. And behind them, shadowed in the far distance, stood the tall figure in the red velvet coat, masked, motionless, strings spread from his fingertips like a conductor before an orchestra. Jonah tried to speak. His mouth opened, but no words came. Instead, his limbs moved on their own. He bowed. The puppets clapped, not with hands, but with an awful clacking of wood against wood. Then the performance began. He danced, twirled, cried, laughed. His voice echoed in monologues he didn't remember writing, every movement rehearsed, every motion flawless. A marionette playing the part of a man. The floor beneath him shimmered. He saw memories in it, fragments of his life distorted by time. The first time he carved wood as a child, the day he found the puppet shop, the first touch, the string, the smile. It had all been a script. Every scene, every breath. The final act began. Jonah stood still as the stage grew dark. A spotlight illuminated a second figure walking slowly toward him. It was the puppet. It held a mask in its hand, his face carved in polished wood. But before placing it, the puppet whispered something. "You always knew how this would end." Jonah felt a tear roll down his cheek, wooden, thick, and sap-like. The puppet placed the mask on Jonah's face, and suddenly everything was quiet. The strings went slack, and Jonah dropped to his knees as the puppet stood above him and took a bow. The curtain fell, and behind it 100 other stages waited. Jonah found himself on one of them, a new audience. New puppets, new masks, but the same role, endlessly replaying the same tragedy. The spotlight rose again, and Jonah stood. He bowed. The clack of wooden applause echoed, and the cycle began anew. Chapter 15. The Marionette That Became Me. They buried Jonah quietly, a closed casket. No eulogy, few mourners. Those who came said he hadn't been the same for months, isolated, frightened. But this isn't about the Jonah they remembered. This is about the Jonah who remained. The house sat empty for a while after. The stage behind the curtain stayed silent. The mirror in the attic grew dusty. The strings lay limp, waiting, until one day, the door opened again. A young couple moved in, smiling, hopeful, expecting their first child. And in the attic, something shifted. A carving knife rolled gently off the bench. The workbench was whole again, and the journal, once filled with Jonah's scrawl, was blank. waiting. But the mirror stayed, and in it, late one evening, the husband saw something move. Not behind him, within him. A small tilt of the head that wasn't his own, a twitch of the hand when no nerves commanded it, a grin that lingered longer than it should have. Downstairs, the velvet curtain unfurled. The stage rebuilt itself, and in the far corner of the basement, the puppet, Jonah's puppet, lay in a glass case. Its eyes opened. Its smile was knowing, because the show never really ends. It just finds a new cast. And in that final moment, as the new man stood frozen before the mirror, he whispered the words Jonah once did. "It's just a puppet." The strings disagreed. They pulled, and the next performance began.